teacher Carlos Carrillo. Get ready to study your Bible.
Dr. Pratt, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Welcome, everybody. Are you ready? I'm very happy to we have a special guest with us here on Are You Ready? Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, expert on the EMP. Just bear with me. Dr. Pry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody to Are You Ready? We have our water here from the artesian well in Augusta, Georgia. I want to welcome all of you watching wherever you are all around the world. Thank you for watching. If you please subscribe, thumbs up, click notification, and please share this video with as many people as possible. This is important, very important information that we're very honored to have Dr. Pry with us this evening here on Are You Ready? Dr. Pry, once again, I thank you for taking this time to be with us on this program on Are You Ready? People need to know the information you're going to share. And before we get started with the questions, and I'm also on the chat, if you want to ask a question, something I haven't asked Dr. Pry, please let me know on the chat. Hopefully we'll be able to, in the next hour, we'll be able to ask Dr. Pry these questions. Before we get started, Dr. Pry, please, if you could let people know who you are, what you've been involved in the last few years.
All right. Well, I'm the executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which is a congressional advisory board and a nonprofit that's dedicated to protecting the nation from EMP and cyber attacks and weapons of mass destruction. I was the chief of staff of the Congressional EMP Commission for the entirety of its existence, which was 17 years from 2001 to 2017. I served on a number of congressional commissions dealing with nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, looking at the nuclear strategy of the United States and of the programs of our adversaries in Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. I was on the professional staff of the House Armed Services Committee, specializing in weapons of mass destruction and protecting against EMP and cyber threats. And I worked in the CIA.
Wow. You have a lot of experience. That's why we're you have a lot of knowledge about this, about EMPs and cyber attacks. And once again, we are very honored to have you here. You took the time to be with us on Are You Ready? Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your interest in this vitally important subject.
Well, just a little before we get started, one of the things I've been doing quite a few years, I've been, studying about EMPs, and I've been telling my wife to always get ready. She says, I don't know, you're always stocking up stuff. I said, well, you never know, because I studied about it, possibilities. But here, before we get started, one of the things on Are You Ready? I want to ask the basics, because I'm sure there are people here in America and around the world, they have no idea what is an EMP, what types of EMP there are. You could, just to get started, let people know what is an EMP, what kinds exist.
All right. Well, an EMP can be made by nature. So there's a natural EMP that comes from the sun in the form of geomagnetic superstorms. And the EMP can be generated also by the high altitude detonation of a nuclear weapon. That is such a high altitude that it's in outer space. And then there are non-nuclear EMP weapons. So there's three basically kinds of EMP threats. Two of them are man-made, nuclear and non-nuclear weapons, and one of them is natural from the sun. To give, in general terms, all of them have a common characteristic that an EMP is basically a super energetic radio wave. or it's like a radio wave. It's basically like a radio wave that's got so much energy in it that it can destroy electronics. In the case of a EMP from the sun, a natural EMP, it could destroy electronics across the entire world. In the case of an extreme solar storm event, like the 1859 Carrington event, or the 1921 railroad storm, it would collapse electric grids all over the world, and everything depends directly or indirectly upon electricity, telecommunications, transportation, even food and water. And so billions of lives would be put at risk worldwide as a result of a natural EMP from the sun. That may be hard to believe, but a picture says 1,000 words on the cover of one of my books. I don't know if you can see it there. Let's see if I can get it into the field of your vision. Okay. This is an actual photograph, a satellite photograph of a coronal mass ejection. See this explosion coming out of the sun? That's what we call a coronal mass ejection. It's basically a big chunk of the sun that comes out of the sunspot. And to give you a sense of the size, now this we photographed a few years ago, and it's what's called a Carrington class coronal mass ejection. This kind of thing we now know happens all the time. And we're basically in a game of Russian roulette with the sun. Someday, one of these things is going to hit us. And let's see, yes, here, no, it's over on the other side here. See this little blue dot? My finger, I'm pointing, there's a little blue dot. Anyway, inserted, that's the size of the Earth compared to the coronal mass ejection. So you don't have an astrophysicist to know that if this hits that, it's going to ruin your whole day. Basically.
Definitely.
The coronal mass is basically a big blob of the sun, millions of degrees in temperature, a piece of great hunk of ionized plasma. It's traveling millions of miles an hour. And when it hits the Earth, we are protected by a magnetic field that surrounds the Earth called the magnetosphere. So that thing doesn't reach the surface of the Earth and burn us all to death. Well, the bad thing that does happen, though, is that the magnetosphere gets distorted as this blob passes all around the Earth, and the magnetic field wobbles around. And that creates the natural EMP everywhere in the world. And the effects would be enough to basically destroy electric grids and end electronic civilization and cost perhaps millions of lives from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. We do get hit with solar storms every year, but fortunately they're not Carrington-class solar storms. They're relatively small. They usually affect countries only at higher northern latitudes and do cause problems. We have to reroute airliners around them. The northern countries have hardened their grids so that they can survive at least these annual solar storms that are a regular occurrence. But every now and then you get hit with a bigger one. Back in 1989, there was a natural solar storm called the Hydro-Quebec storm, which blacked out half of Canada in 90 seconds and destroyed transformers, destroyed an extra high voltage transformer in the Salem nuclear power plant in New Jersey. Now this transformer is designed to carry 750,000 volts. Imagine that amount of energy, 750,000 volts, but it was melted in 90 seconds by the power of the pulse. And that was not a Carrington-class geomagnetic storm. That was more powerful than the run-of-the-mill solar storm. But it gave you a sense that this is a real threat. I think it was July 23rd, 2012. Ironically, according to the Mayan sun calendar, the world was supposed to end in the year 2012. And almost, fortunately, on July 23rd, we were narrowly missed by a Carrington-class coronal mass ejection. It crossed the path of the Earth and missed us by 3 days.
Whoa.
Had it hit, we might not be talking here today.
Right.
And surviving would have happened. And NASA estimates, based on that and other events, that the likelihood of a coronal mass ejection, or a Carrington event happening again today, is of 12% per decade. You know, that virtually guarantees that within our lifetimes, or no later than that of our grandchildren, the likelihood is 100%. I mean, it's inevitable it will happen someday, but within 3 generations for sure, we're going to get hit with one of these things. And to give you another sense of what the sun can do, naturally EMP can do, I have here in my continuing show and tell, let's see, can you see this? Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, this is a telegraph key.
Yeah, a telegraph.
This was cutting-edge electronic technology in 1859.
Correct.
And when an event happened, you can see, I think, in your screen what a clumsy, clunky, robust piece of electronics this is. Okay, it's made of heavy metal components. It's on a wooden base. And in 1859, there were telegraph systems on every continent except Antarctica, in India, China, Europe, America, North America. They all failed catastrophically. Telegraph keys like this all over the world melted. The pulse was so powerful. And in fact, they even started fires, and whole telegraph stations burned down. There were forest fires from telegraph lines exploding into flames in the forests. We had just laid the transatlantic cable connecting Europe to North America in 1859, and the pulse was so powerful it reached down miles deep into the Atlantic Ocean and burned that cable up. And it took many years to replace the cable. Now, fortunately, those were the horse and buggy days. We were not yet an electronic civilization. The telegraph was a novelty, and survival depended upon it. But today, if something like that happened, telegraph keys like that crude electronics are literally a billion times less valuable than the modern microelectronics we depend upon today, which are much more sensitive. They operate on much lower voltages, and that's one of the things that makes us so vulnerable. Now, if you,
I have a regarding that same thing, what you just said. What are the possibilities? You said a corona mass ejection, and you said 12%? You said 12% possibility of a corona mass ejection hitting the Earth
every decade. I think the estimate is 12% per decade. So every decade. It goes up by 12% per decade.
Okay, and the next question I have: what would be more devastating, a CME, a coronal mass ejection, or exploding over the let's say the U.S., for example, hypothetically?
Well, that's always a hard question to ask. The easy answer, when you say more devastating, a nuclear weapon, a single nuclear weapon, detonated at 300 kilometers altitude over the United States would put an EMP field over all of North America. It would cover all 48 contiguous United States, most of Canada, a big chunk of Mexico. One bomb, and you won't even hear it going off. Wow. You're standing on the ground directly beneath you. This is not your Nagasaki, Hiroshima mushroom cloud-like nuclear attack. In fact, theoretically, it's not really a nuclear attack. You're using the nuclear energy of the bomb to create the EMP. And the bomb is detonated in outer space, in the vacuum of outer space, over 100 kilometers or more over your head. So you wouldn't even hear it. No blast would reach the ground. There'd be no radioactive fallout. You wouldn't even see it on a cloudy day. And if it's a super EMP weapon, which actually has a very low yield, because the thing that causes EMP is not the big blast, but it's the gamma rays. And there's a category of nuclear weapon called a super EMP weapon that makes extraordinarily powerful EMP fields, more powerful than the sun. In fact, the kind of EMP that's unique to man-made EMP is called E1 EMP. It has very short wavelengths. You know, for example, this computer that we're talking about, it wouldn't be, if it was unplugged and I was relying on batteries, you know, the EMP from the sun wouldn't affect it. It wouldn't affect your car. It wouldn't affect the airplanes that are flying, because the wavelength in the natural EMP is so big that it basically can't couple into these small electronic systems, not even into a big airplane. But that EMP from the sun would certainly destroy the electric grid, telecommunication systems, gas pipelines, all these things that we need. And once the electric grid goes down, everything basically comes down. The nuclear EMP would do everything the sun could do. In fact, the field spreads that the sun makes are not as powerful as what a nuclear EMP does. And the sun can't do, it's called E1 EMP, this high frequency, this shock wave, which has short wavelength. And it can couple directly into things like your computer, into airplanes, into automobiles. The difference between a nuclear EMP, there's two differences to put it in general terms. The nuclear EMP would not cover as much as the natural EMP from the sun. Okay, you can cover the whole planet with a solar EMP, the whole planet. Okay? But the nuclear EMP causes deeper damage, deeper structure immediately. Okay, so your car wouldn't start immediately, the computer would immediately be, it propagates at the speed of light. So all this damage, you'd experience much deeper damage, and it would happen immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah. So, you tell me what's better, to have the whole planet lose the electric grid and the life-sustaining critical infrastructures. That's what the sun will do. But you might have 3 days of emergency generators still working and other systems still working. But after 3 days, because the emergency power will go out, everything else will fail. And you'll be where you would have been with the nuclear EMP attack. With the nuclear EMP attack, okay, the damage doesn't cover the whole world. It'll basically cover a continent with one weapon. If you attacked all the continents with one weapon, you could do the whole world. Okay, maybe Iran would think about doing that to bring on the 12th Imam and all that. But let's suppose that you're talking about one nuclear weapon to do an EMP on one continent. But you will have so it doesn't cover as much territory as the sun does, but the damage is deeper and it's immediate, and so you don't have that 3 days. So it's kind of hard to answer your question. I'm not sure. I guess it would be better to have the whole world not affected all at once. So and the likelihood, and then you have to deal with the issue of likelihood. With the sun, there's nothing we can do about it. You can't deter it. There's no reasoning with the sun. You can't pass an arms control treaty that the sun is going to obey.
That's right.
To do it, no matter what we do. We can only protect ourselves from it, okay? Whereas the nuclear EMP, that's a human thing. You might be able to deter it. You might be able to sign a treaty. Who knows? There maybe, the other side, so there might be there's no, the likelihood of it happening is much more debatable. Whereas there's no debate the likelihood of the sun. It's 100% for sure the sun will throw a coronal mass ejection at the Earth. It's going to hit the Earth, and it's going to cause one of these Carrington events someday.
Okay. Wow. So it's from what you're saying, it is better if it's a nuclear bomb over, let's say, over the U.S. We don't, if it's a coronal mass ejection around the world, you have 3 days. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
wow.
You're basically 3 days before everything fails, because the hospitals will have emergency generators that will still run. Some gas stations will have emergency generators. Your car won't be fried, but your car will run out of gas eventually, and you'll need to get gas. Airplanes won't fall out of the sky. They'll have a chance to land. But in a nuclear EMP, your car will be fried. The airplanes will fall out of the sky. There'll be immediately no water coming, and the hospitals, the emergency generators will probably be fried. So the real difference between, there's only the two big differences between the nuclear EMP attack and the solar impact.
Is 3 days?
First, the sun will cover the whole world with a Carrington event, whereas the nuke will cover a continent. But the sun gives you 3 days, at least in terms of emergency, before everything fails.
Right.
whereas everything will fail immediately, it will be destroyed, and all the electronics will be gone down immediately as a result of the nuclear EMP.
So so what you're saying, if we ever do have a nuclear bomb detonated over the United States, if there were airplanes, every single airplane will fall to the ground?
Well, we don't know. I wouldn't say. It depends upon the kind of bomb and the yield. A crude nuclear weapon, a low yield nuclear weapon, like a first generation bomb, like a Hiroshima or Nagasaki bomb, would probably affect some airplanes, but certainly not all of them. Some small fraction of them. A super EMP weapon, however, will generate such powerful field strengths. Putting percentages on these things is very hard, but I would not be surprised if most of the airplanes didn't crash immediately as a result of that.
Wow.
Because all electronics would be gone. And we have about, every day at any given moment, there's something like 1,500 airliners carrying 500,000 people over the United States, and all those people would be at risk, at least from the nuclear. From the sun, they wouldn't have to worry unless they were flying at night, because when the grid goes, the landing lights, it'll be harder. Of course, they have emergency generators, and so you'd probably be able to get the airliners down. It wouldn't be easy, but
you have that 3 days.
If it was a nuclear EMP on the United States, I'd rather be in a different continent. Okay, but let's talk a little about the non-nuclear EMP, all right?
Yeah,
because that usually gets not enough attention, but we ought to pay more attention to it. Okay. Because it's also an existential threat. People usually aren't that impressed with non-nuclear EMP weapons, because a single non-nuclear EMP weapon cannot cover a whole continent. It has usually a very limited range. Rarely do non-nuclear EMP weapons have field strengths that reach out more than 1 kilometer, say. Okay, but the technology is available to anyone. You can actually buy devices that can generate these localized but very powerful non-nuclear EMPs. You can buy them from a magazine. There's in one of my books, I have the advertisement for a thing called the EMP briefcase. All right, that's sold to anybody, and you don't even need a license to buy it. And it looks just like a normal briefcase. It can be operated by one person, but it puts out 100,000 volts per meter for a range of a few hundred yards. And that's really all you need to bring civilization to an end, if you know what you're doing. Now it's not intended to be a weapon. The manufacturer didn't intend it to be used as a weapon. It's a diagnostic tool. When you're building an airport, for example, and before you put in where the radar is going to be, you'd like to say, well, how far does the airstrip have to be for the plane to land so that the radar doesn't fry the electronics in the airplane? And so what you'd like to do is map that all out by using one of these EMP suitcase devices. Or if you're designing a factory that has heavy electronic, machinery in it, because they put out electromagnetic transients. And if they're put too close together, the machines can destroy each other. So before you put a lot of money into, putting the machines in, you'd want to just have this thing simulate the kind of field strengths that the machinery is going to put out, so that you can know how far apart do I have to space the machines, or what kind of blocking devices and shields do I have to put between the machines so they don't fratricide each other. So the manufacturer never intended these things to be used as a weapon. They're used for peaceful purposes, but it could, somebody who could, a terrorist organization. Let's start with the simplest thing. Let's say some nut, all right, just a disgruntled person. We've arrived technologically at a place in our society now where somebody who had enough money could buy one of these EMP suitcases and put it in the trunk of his car, drive up to an extra high voltage transformer and topple the technological pillars of civilization, or Boston, an area in New York, or a major metropolitan area. A team of terrorists could black out the whole country, doing the same thing. If you had a team of, fewer than 10 people who were going around with these things with cars, to just drive up to the transformer and turn the EMP device on, then just wait to see the transformers sparking or catching on fire, smoke coming out of the transformer, so destroyed the transformer, and then move on to another one. If you there's 2,000 transformers in this country, but they're called extra high voltage transformers. There's 2,000.
Okay.
Yeah, they are indispensable to our civilization. Most people don't know that, but we cannot operate without them. They're one example of the things that's indispensable to our civilization. They make it possible to take electricity from Niagara Falls, for example, and send it all the way down to New York City, and then have the current stepped down so people in New York City can use it. And if those transformers go, the whole grid fails. And when the grid fails, all the other critical infrastructures, because they all use electricity, they fail too. And what happens is when you knock out just a few, there was a study by the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that got leaked to the press and published in the Wall Street Journal, or at least its conclusions, that said that, if you took out 9 of these 2,000 extra high voltage transformers, because the load has to go somewhere. If you took the load, and don't forget, these things are carrying 500,000, 750,000 volts. So you multiply that by 9, and now you're dumping it on the other transformers. Well, they just can't take that load. And so it causes a rippling, cascading failure through the whole North American electric grid, which would collapse the grid for a protracted period of time. And protracted meaning, 18 months. And the calculations we did in the EMP Commission was that, if we had a nationwide blackout that lasted a year, we could lose up to 90% of our population just from disease, inflation, and societal collapse. We can't keep 330 million people alive for a year with no water. We can't keep them alive with no food. There's only enough food in this country to feed 330 million people for 30 days. And it will start spoiling as soon as the electric grid fails. So that's the problem. And that's a problem that's posed not just by the sun, not just by the nuclear EMP weapon, but even by these non-nuclear EMP weapons that we rarely talk about, because most people are interested in the threat from the sun and the nuclear. But this little, these easier things that almost anybody can get their hands on is almost as big a threat.
A question. You mentioned non-nuclear. How many transformers in the U.S. would have to be disconnected? How many other destroyed or blown up or whatever with this EMP, the non-nuclear EMP device? How many would one transformer cause, or do you need to across the United States 10, 5 that would cause the whole country to be affected, or is it just one area?
Well, a study by the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission identified 9 transformers. But if you knew 9 key transformers out of the 2,000, that would be enough to cause a nationwide blackout that would last more than a year. And if you didn't know which 9 specifically, all right, so you take out 20 of them, but it would be a very small number, because each of these transformers carries so much power, it's unrealistic to expect that you can dump that much load. Every time a transformer goes down, that's another 500,000, 750,000 volts. It's getting dumped on some other transformer. It's not designed to do the work of 2 transformers. They'll take up a little bit of the load, a little bit of the slack, but there's just not that much slack in the system to be able to absorb those kinds of voltages suddenly being dumped on the system. And by the way, that's how a cyber attack would try to destroy us. And that's what this current cyber attack that's still going on could be about. Washington always puts the best face on these things. They always make it sound like what the Russians or the Chinese or the North Koreans are doing is just stealing our information.
Right.
They're not stealing our information. They're probably inserting, in addition to stealing our information, they're probably also inserting cyber bugs like logic bombs and viruses into the system, so that if they get in a war with us, in the future, they can turn these things on, and they can destroy transformers too, and put the whole country into blackout. I mean, imagine if you were North Korea, you want to let the United States, send bombers and have a normal, fair fight with us? Of course not. You're going to hit us in our Achilles heel. If we can take down our grid, all of our military bases depend upon the civilian electric grid. I mean, we're not going to be projecting power anywhere without that electric grid. And our priorities will shift immediately from trying to protect Japan, protect South Korea, to saving our own people, since we don't have a lot of time to save them. People will notice it when they can't get water and there's a diminishing food supply. That would immediately change it. But how does a cyber attack, for example, destroy the grid? Well, it's the same phenomena about the transformers. There's other ways of doing it, but we'll talk about transformers for simplicity here, okay? There's a control systems called SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Systems. They regulate how the electricity flows into the transformers. Every transformer is different. Transformers can't be mass produced. That's why we can't stockpile large numbers of these extremely expensive transformers, which are very hard to replace. They're bigger than houses. They weigh many tons. In order to move one of these things, there's only 3 railway cars in the whole United States that can move an extra high voltage transformer because they weigh so much. They're so big. Bridges have to be reinforced. Highways have to be widened. We're not used to. We've never had to replace large numbers of transformers, and they're not even manufactured in this country anymore. But these transformers are unique. Every one has different windings on the inside because every one of those 2,000 transformers plays a somewhat different role in the grid, and that's just sort of common sense if you think about it. Because I use the example of taking a transformer to drive the electricity from Niagara Falls down to New York City, right?
Right.
And the number of windings that are required to do that, there's a specific design in that transformer to move the kinds of voltage it has to move over that distance, all right? Now, the distances between Hoover Dam and Las Vegas are different than the distance between New York City and Niagara Falls. And if you think of it, there's always going to be significant differences, maybe even if it's just a mile or half a mile, it means the design of that transformer has to be different. And so you can't just substitute one transformer for another. And the current always has to go into the transformer in a certain way when it has that different design. And the SCADA regulates the way that voltage goes into the transformer. But if you can get a bug, a cyber bug, into the SCADA, you change the way the current flows into the transformer, it doesn't make an EMP, but it's called a system-generated overvoltage. Eventually, that will cause the transformer to burn out because it's not getting the energy in it in the same way that it's supposed to, is designed to receive it. A system-generated overvoltage. And so you can use cyber attacks to burn out 9, 10, 12, of the transformers, and the load has to go somewhere, and it will cause that thing. And by the way, when we're talking about EMP, this is one of the most important messages, because the bad guys, they don't think of EMP and cyber as being different kinds of attack. To them, a nuclear EMP attack is part of cyber warfare. It's not part of nuclear warfare. We don't think about it that way. We think of cyber as being in a box all by itself. They don't think about non-nuclear EMP weapons as being like a conventional weapon. They think of that's part of cyber warfare or information warfare, or they have their military doctrine is very different from ours, where they think of combining nuclear EMP, non-nuclear EMP, physical sabotage, and cyber attacks, all coordinated together like a blitzkrieg in cyberspace to achieve their goals. We're really far behind their strategic thinking in these matters, the way the Western democracies were far behind Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and how to fight land wars in the case of Nazi Germany, and how to fight wars at sea in the case of Imperial Japan. You know, they have mastered new technologies, new strategies that we're only starting, very few of us even are even thinking about them. You know, we're so mired in the past. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, Washington just flounders around every time we get hit with these cyber attacks, which is an extraordinarily bad reaction. Every time we prove to them that we don't know what the hell we're doing and we can't protect us, they get more aggressive the next time. Sometime it's going to go over the cliff and they might say, is this the time we do an EMP cyber Pearl Harbor and just take the United States out altogether?
That's interesting what you just said, because I thought the same thing. Is it possible, about what you just mentioned, these cyber attacks, could those, because they either blamed it on Russia mostly, and maybe it was China, could some of the things that were just done a few weeks ago, could these be a dry run for something?
Oh, they are. Absolutely. They are exactly
They
that.
are.
I wrote an article about this called Cybergeddon just before Christmas, when the attacks were first revealed. You know, to basically point the finger at Washington again, where they're not connecting the dots. I mean, it's really astonishing how stupid official Washington is when it comes to these matters. You know, they just think about, you know, the cyber guys on our side. They only talk to each other, our cyber specialists, and it's even worse than that, because the people who are in charge don't know anything about cyber. You know, the guy who was most responsible for our vulnerability to this ongoing cyber attack right now is a gentleman named Christopher Krebs. He was he was the director of the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, you know, which was supposed to be responsible for not only protecting our critical infrastructures from cyber attacks. And his own agency is one of the agencies that actually got penetrated by the bad guys. They're so bad at it that they couldn't even protect themselves from this attack. You know what was going on for 9 months. But who's Christopher Krebs? Who have we put in charge of our cybersecurity? Christopher Krebs is a lawyer, and he's a former lobbyist for Microsoft. And he was held over by the Obama administration. So the Obama administration deserves blame for hiring this guy to serve such an important role. And then President Trump must share the blame too, because he kept him on. And they actually promoted him to being the director. He only fired him a month ago when Christopher Krebs declared that the elections were the cleanest elections in American history. That finally got him fired. I've been asking them to fire him for 3 years because the guy's grumpy. He doesn't know anything about cyber. He doesn't know anything about EMP. He's a lawyer. And that's what the problem is. You know, that there's that old saying about Washington that it's not what you know, it's who you know. You know, if you want to protect yourself from cyber and EMP, it should be what you know, not who you know. Okay, and this is the problem. We've got former congressional staffers and lawyers and lobbyists and people who know how to raise money and have played important roles, have had their lips glued to the right senator's rear end all their careers, and these people get in charge of our security. And that's why nothing seems to work and nothing seems to get done. You know, and the cyber example is just one of them. But to go back to your original point, which is a very important point, and I don't want to pass it up, this is definitely a dry run for future war. One of the things I pointed out in the article is, you know, how can they be so blind that they haven't noticed that while this cyber attack has been going on, that Vladimir Putin himself conducted a major strategic nuclear forces exercise, and they actually launched 5 ICBMs, live ICBM launches, okay, while the cyber attack is going on. And then they did a space offensive. They launched a new anti-satellite weapon, you know, demonstrate basically as a direct descent missile to attack. So they basically have while they were attacking us in cyberspace, they also simulated a war in space to attack our space assets, and then a nuclear conflict, okay, using all 3 legs of their nuclear triad to fight a nuclear and cyber and space World War III against the United States. Obviously, these things are coordinated? The Russians, in their doctrine, they describe coordinating these events and they practice it in their exercise. And we're seeing an example. This latest one is an example. But on our side, people, because our own doctrine for cyber warfare is so primitive, we only think of cyber warfare in terms, not as a joint operation, the way the Russians and Chinese and North Koreans and even the Iranians do. We think of cyber as narrowly cyber, so it's only about computer bugs and viruses. And we just don't have the strategic imagination to say, well, what can you coordinate? A nuclear and EMP and non-nuclear EMP and space offensives with cyber. What benefits do you get if you can leverage all three of these things? Well, the kind of benefits you get from that is the same thing that Nazi Germany could get from its blitzkrieg strategy, when it figured out that by the coordinated operation of armored spearheads, massed armored spearheads with air power and mobile infantry and artillery, that they had a new way of warfare that the West was completely unprepared for. And they basically swept over Europe. And in 60 days, they conquered all of Western Europe and they nearly conquered the Soviet Union, okay? And Japan came very close to winning World War II in the Pacific because we understand the aircraft carriers and air power, not battleships, were the wave of the future. That was the future of warfare. And now we're failing in terms of strategic imagination again, where we do not see that the coordinated use of EMP and cyber warfare, small scale commando tactics, where you put in a handful of guys to shoot up transformers and control systems. You could basically win World War III. There's a good book. Actually, the foundational book for all of this is by Vladimir Slupchenko's No Contact Wars, General Vladimir Slupchenko, brilliant Russian strategist who describes this new way of warfare. And the reason he calls it no contact wars is he means that you can win World War III without our normal military forces, our traditional military forces, having to come in contact with the enemy. You don't have to fight the Marines. You don't have to fight the U.S. Navy. You don't have to come in contact with these guys, with the U.S. Air Force. You can attack the electric grid and the technological Achilles heel of your adversary and cause the whole civilization to collapse. And you'll win the war, in record time. They regard this, and all of them, basically the Chinese and the North Korean, the Iranian doctrine, they're all copies of Slupchenko's great book. They all claim to have invented it independently, but really the Russians came up with it first, and they all basically have copied the Russian model. Everybody except us, and most people in the West haven't even read the Russian and Chinese and Iranian writings on this. But Slupchenko is the best. And but yeah, the short answer to your question is absolutely that they are practicing for conflict, and that's what this is all about. There was a big exercise in 2018 called Vostok 18.
Oh yeah,
it was basically probably the biggest exercise in world history. Okay, 300,000 troops, 300,000, 6,000 tanks and other armored vehicles, and over 1,000 aircraft. And then there was, of course, a nuclear exchange, and it was done in cooperation with China. So the Chinese and Russians played out a World War III where they were allied together against the United States. But before Vostok 18 happened, and they practiced this World War III to defeat the United States, there were hundreds of cyber attacks on the U.S. electric grid, to see how deeply hundreds of U.S. utilities got penetrated. Again, and up until that point, it was the most aggressive cyber campaign. And it happened about a month before Vostok 18 happened. And what I think what they're obviously doing is, well, first we're going to try the new way of warfare, this new mode of warfare. And maybe we have to fight the normal nuclear tank, boots on the ground type war. And if we win, we won't have to do that. But then, of course, they practice the normal traditional war anyway, because you want to be prepared for all contingencies. But almost nobody in the West put those two things together. That those cyber attacks, those Russian cyber attacks that happened a month before Vostok 18, were certainly part of the Vostok
of the plan.
There's a handful of my colleagues, like Admiral William Studeman, for example, former director of the National Security Agency and acting director of the CIA. He's one of the few people who gets it, and says, we really need to think about this the way the Russians and Chinese are thinking about it, and we need to be aware that a nuclear war, a large scale, the next big war is going to be preceded by exactly this kind of cyber attack, and our people don't get it. Right now, before World War II, and I apologize if I'm dominating, if I'm going on at too much length here, but before World War II, one of the reasons the Western democracies almost lost was not only didn't they have the strategic imagination, to conceive of the blitzkrieg, and they didn't see that coming. In fact, they were so mired in the past that the French put all their defense dollars into the Maginot Line, this fortified series of fortresses that stretched from Switzerland to Belgium, because they thought that World War II would be fought like World War I, trench warfare. So they built the world's best trench, basically, best fortified trench, which was complete waste of money and resources. And our guys in the Western democracies, the people who really understood, fighter aircraft, they didn't talk to the guys who were tank specialists. And they didn't talk to the guys that wanted to use trucks for, mobile infantry and mobile artillery operations. There were only a handful of people in the West, who thought deeply about those things, like Major General J.F.C. Fuller, for example, was one of them who foresaw it. General Patton, on our side, understood the tank part of it. Winston Churchill got some of it, but all of them were derided as crazy and and extremists. And I just see the same thing as happening today. It's one of the disadvantages that I think free political systems have when it comes to totalitarian powers that are basically military dictatorships. We beat these guys out. Our civilization beats them out when it comes to prosperity and having different selections of coffee, okay, consumer goods, cars, having a good life, which is, what life is supposed to be about, having all the material comforts, music, plays. We beat them all out on that. Our creativity goes into those kinds of things, all right? Their creativity goes into one thing, war. They see political power, coming out of the barrel of a gun. They're, put it politely, they're national security states. And all of their creative and resource efforts, they do the bare minimum to keep their people happy, okay? I mean, their people are happy if they don't have to starve to death, basically. But all their creative efforts and the resources go into thinking about how do we win that next war and preparing for it. And that's how come, in the past, we've come so close to losing. At this time, the next war, when this kind of war we're talking about, it can be won and lost at the speed of light in a half an hour. And there won't be any coming back from it.
I have a question, a few more before we finish the program. A few more. One of the things you mentioned, hypothetical, if let's say either Russia or China would do what you just mentioned about a non-nuclear, or how can the U.S. would it affect NORAD in the process? Could the U.S. be able to do something, or would it be too late if something happened like this? Like you mentioned, will everything be shut up? Would that be affected, or is it protected against such a thing?
if they do it the way they're planning it, which is
Mhm.
an arm operation using EMP, super EMP weapons, especially,
Mhm.
you know, and really that's the only thing they really need. But they would throw in the kitchen sink. You know, they would also throw in non-nuclear EMP weapons, and they would send in saboteurs to, to take out stuff as well. But right now we're not prepared for that.
Wow.
The EMP weapon generates 200,000 volts per meter. We have only hardened our best protected military systems, including NORAD headquarters, are only hardened to 50,000 volts per meter. That's 1/8 the hardness level that you need. And you need to be harder than that. Now we should increase the hardness of our military systems.
Mhm.
But if we don't increase the hardness of our military systems, they'd be fried. And, they'd be no more useful than our personal computer on our desk, after the attack. Their electronics would be destroyed and we would not be able to retaliate. We also might not even know against whom to retaliate. In order for deterrence to work, that's the other very attractive thing about an EMP attack, and also about cyber attacks, is deterrence only works if you know against whom to retaliate. One of the first things to go in an EMP attack is the satellites and the ballistic missile early warning radars. These are our these are basically our eyes and ears that tell us who attacked us. They get destroyed at the speed of light. They're not going to be stupid and do it by launching an ICBM off their territory. Even North Korea has got 2 satellites that are orbiting over us now. They pass over this country several times a day, the KMS-3 and the KMS-4. The EMP Commission warned that these things could be armed with super EMP weapons. They could set them off at any time they're passing over us. There's hundreds of satellites in low Earth orbit, thousands of them, actually. All we would know is that suddenly nothing works and our satellites are gone and our radars are gone. Now, who did that? We wouldn't know.
Wow. We wouldn't know. So we would have no idea who to go retaliate against at that moment, correct?
That's right. And a player like Iran, and this is a game that, it's extraordinarily more dangerous than past games. A country like Iran has every interest in doing what's called a false flag attack. Iran would love to convince America, for example, that we were attacked by Russia or China, to get a nuclear war going between the infidel powers, so that they would wipe each other out, and Iran would be left the victor as a consequence. So, you have to be very worried that if you think you know who attacked you, like in the case of this ongoing cyber attack that's happening right now, the best guess that Washington is making is that it's Russian, and it probably is Russian because of the sophistication.
Right.
Although Microsoft recently concluded that there was a second actor participating in this attack. My guess there would be that China has joined with Russia in doing this cyber, just the way they coordinated with Russia in the nuclear war in Vostok 18, okay? But you can't rule out anything, how do we know that Iran, hasn't suddenly got some genius, cyber genius who's figured out, I can make a very sophisticated attack and make it look like it's a joint Russian-Chinese thing, at just when there's a crisis going on between the United States and China and Russia, to get these guys going at each other, such scenarios are unfortunately increasingly plausible.
You just said it. You're saying that these scenario that you just mentioned, as the years progress, they're getting more the possibility of that they would happen. Correct? It's not science fiction. It's a movie. These things are for real. They happen. Correct?
I'd say as the months progress, it's getting more realistic that these things can happen. I think you're being too generous to us.
As the months progress.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now, I think you sent me an email in which you mentioned China and talked about super EM. And I know we're having issues with the South China Sea and tensions between the U.S. and China. uh, do you think that the China would is their technology to the level that they could attempt something like that right now against the U.S. if put against the wall?
Oh yes, absolutely. Uh, uh, I think their technology is probably a lot more advanced than our intelligence community imagines.
Mm.
I've written articles very critical, and not just myself, but other people, independent people who, like myself, worked in the intelligence community and the defense community. You know, you take one example. This estimate, the Department of Defense published an estimate that China has 200 nuclear weapons in its inventory. Okay, they've been saying that China has about 200 nuclear weapons for the past 15 years.
They probably have more than that.
I mean, it's ridiculous. They've got 200 nuclear weapons, but they also have, 1,500 ballistic missiles that are capable of delivering nuclear weapons. The Russians estimate that the Chinese have 3,000 nuclear weapons. I think the Russians are probably much closer to it. And the sophistication of these weapons, well, we know the Chinese almost certainly have super EMP weapons, which we don't have. I mean, we have not developed. Let me back up. My former boss of the EMP Commission actually did design a super EMP weapon, but we never, and we tested them successfully, so we know they work.
Okay.
But at the end of the Cold War, we never bothered deploying anything because the Cold War was over. And so we don't have any super EMP weapons in our inventory, and it would take us a long time to build one because the nuclear weapons infrastructure has so deteriorated. We haven't been building nuclear weapons. I don't know if your audience understands that, but the nuclear weapons we have today are all more than 30 years old. They're all weapons that were built during the Reagan administration or before, and we've been patching them up for 30 years without testing them. And the bad guys have been testing. They've got whole new generations of nuclear weapons, including the Chinese. But yes, I think we'd be very surprised if we get in a war with China that we've been really underestimating their capabilities for a long time. The Navy doesn't want to come to grips with, just to take one example of a very sophisticated new Chinese missile system. It's called the anti-ship ballistic missile, or ASBM. It's basically a missile that's close to intercontinental range. So it can hit an aircraft carrier anywhere in the Pacific. The warhead can see the aircraft carrier and can actually hit a moving aircraft carrier.
Wow.
That is an enormous nightmare, all right? Because it basically makes obsolete our aircraft carriers. But guess what, all right? The Navy, doesn't want to accept the possibility that aircraft carriers are not the decisive instrument in future war. All their plans are based around the idea that aircraft carriers, are basically going to be the decisive factor in a future war. What did our Navy think back before World War II? We talked about this earlier. They didn't even want to build aircraft carriers because they thought the battleship was going to be the future of war. But then we lost the Pacific Fleet, Pearl Harbor, the aircraft carriers. Now we learned that lesson, but maybe learned it too well, and haven't even come to, it's pretty obvious to me that that's just one example of the kind of a surprise that could have decisive effects on us. Where you could use an anti-ship ballistic missile, to basically take out a couple $1 million ASBM to take out $1 billion aircraft carrier, and so yeah, China is definitely. I'm not at all confident we would be able to win a war against China. And neither is the Department of Defense. They admit too that we're increasingly in trouble, with China, and they think we'd be able to win a nuclear war because they think that we have more warheads.
Right.
But I think the Russians are right. I think the Chinese have probably got at least as many nuclear warheads as we do, and they're probably more newer and more sophisticated. I know. Right. One of the weapons they've got Oh, it's the DF-41 ICBM. We know that they've deployed, and I don't understand how the Department of Defense does its math, okay? But they're supposed to have 30 of these DF-41 ICBMs. Each of the DF-41 ICBMs carries 10 warheads. This is just one of their missiles, okay? So that's 300 warheads. Now, how do you get, how can they have 200 warheads when they've got 10 DF-41s? I mean, the math just doesn't work. And the sophistication of the DF-41. It's basically, we used to have a missile. It was the most sophisticated ICBM we ever built. It's called the MX missile. You know, it could carry 10 warheads. This DF-41 is basically a mobile MX missile. Mobile, you know.
Okay.
We don't have any mobile ICBMs. We have MX never went mobile. We've always put them in silos. So that missile system, that one missile system, the DF-41, is more sophisticated by far than any ICBM the United States has ever deployed. And why don't
they have 30 of them? You said they have 30 of them. China
they have 30 of them. They started deploying them, I think, last year, and they've already got 30. When they have 50, and they might already have 50. Okay, you know, we don't really know how many missiles they have or how many warheads they have because of the underground Great Wall. You know, we discovered maybe 10 years ago that the Russian equivalent of their strategic rocket forces has got this tunnel network that comprises 5,000 kilometers of underground tunnels where they can hide missiles and hide warheads and hide anything, really. And we don't know what's in that tunnel system. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if they've got most of their missiles hidden there so to hide from us. If they had 50 of these DF-51s, that would give them 500 weapons, 500 highly accurate weapons. And that's enough to destroy all of our missile silos, all of our bomber bases, and all of our command posts. So China is very close. I think they've already got that capability. You know, the one might ask, why hasn't Russia and China already taken us out and attacked us? Napoleon once said, you know, never interfere with an enemy when he's in the process of defeating himself. And yeah, when you look at what we've been doing, you know, our foreign and defense policy has been so misguided. You know, and our domestic affairs are obviously, I mean, we're basically in the middle of a cold civil war. You know, with the Biden administration coming in, who wants to cut our nuclear arsenal dramatically and reduce our defense spending. We're destroying our own economy with a reaction to the COVID-19 virus. You don't need to go to war when you're winning World War. Sun Tzu also said, you know, the best victory is to achieve, it is best to win without battle. Okay? So if you don't have to fight in order to achieve victory in World War III, you know, they're not going to, they don't have to do that. We're basically self-destructing in front of their eyes. And maybe at the end, when they think that we've reached the maximum level of weakness, they'll give us the final push. But we haven't bottomed out yet. Our trajectory, I think to any objective observer, is downhill right now. They're not going to do anything until it looks like we've hit rock bottom. And then they might stop us from recovering from that.
Yeah, so what you're saying, China and Russia, in that sense, the same thing, that they're just observing, watching, waiting for the opportunity.
I think they're helping us hit rock bottom too. You know, I'm sure these guys did everything they could to interfere with our elections, to encourage radical unrest among our student groups. You know, we've got hundreds of thousands of Chinese students in this country, you know, and it is just a matter of fact that under China's law, every citizen of China has a legal obligation to serve as an agent of the Chinese government, you know, to do their bidding was, to spy for them, you know, to steal our secrets, to engage in activism and help spread student unrest. You know, I'm sure they've been giving millions of dollars in aid to all the left-wing radical groups that want to tear America down.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not just being neutral observers. We're under cyber attack right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and part of that is the observation part of that is how are we going to react to it? Is it just going to be we're going to get really upset we've already forgotten about it. It's already, except on this program, nobody's really talking that much about it, and it'll be forgotten soon. And the Russians and Chinese will see, oh, we can actually get that. We can go in and ransack them for 9 months, and they probably install cyber in their critical infrastructures for 9 months, and they're not going to do anything. And so they'll escalate the next time. Pretty soon.
I was going to ask you regarding what you just said. Sorry to interrupt you. I was thinking, how did they do that for 9 months? How did they? Because that's what they're saying, that they were able to go cyber attack that lasted 9 months. How did they do that?
Some people think it's been going on for more than a year. Well, one way they can get away with that is because we've got people like Christopher Krebs in charge of our cybersecurity. That's the man has no competence. And guess what? When President Trump finally fired Christopher Krebs, and he didn't fire him really for the right reason. I mean, he fired him because he declared the elections to be the cleanest in U.S. history. CISA also had the job of monitoring cyber attacks against U.S. elections to make sure. Okay? But he should have been fired long ago because he wasn't competent. But they replaced him. His new replacement is a guy named Brandon Wales, who's a former congressional staffer who also knows nothing about EMP or cybersecurity. So the incompetence is deep in our system. Even when you fire one obvious bad guy and incompetent, the guy who replaces him is not necessarily an improvement. I think we're at a point of, I think what we're undergoing, this isn't a Republican and Democrat thing, by the way. And I have very little respect for the Republican Party either, even though I support President Trump and voted for Trump and all the rest. I think the Republican Party is also deeply corrupt. It's not totalitarian the way the Democrat Party is. Okay, it's a choice between incompetent, corrupt people in the Republican Party or totalitarian, fascistic communists in the Democrat Party. Sort of the choices that are with us. But I think we worse than all of that is, I think we're undergoing what every civilization goes through. Every great civilization needs a moment of crisis because if you look at, for example, Rome, I think Rome, we're following the path of Rome. Remarkably, the parallels are striking. Most people don't realize that free political systems, republics or democracies, are rare in history, and none of them have lasted longer than 300 years. That's because when it comes to the struggle to survive, unfortunately, they're just not as good at it as totalitarian systems and military dictatorships. And that's why most people end up living under tyrannies and totalitarian and authoritarian systems for most of Earth's history. And the Roman system, but this is true of most systems. You have a few generations, if you're lucky, a few generations of highly competent people. The America I grew up in, or that I inherited, from the Great Generation. When I think of the Great Generation that won World War II, and I think of the miracles our government was able to accomplish. Defeating Nazi Germany, defeating Imperial Japan. We started off with nothing. Half of our army didn't have rifles. But, we became the arsenal of democracy. We mobilized 20 million men. We saved the Soviet Union from going under by providing them with millions of tons of supplies. We invented the atomic bomb in 3 years, okay? It never even existed. went from being a gleam in Albert Einstein's eye to being a real weapon in 3 years. We invented nuclear power. We created nuclear submarines. We put satellites in orbit and sent a man to the moon and created a national highway system that was bigger than the one the Roman Empire built.
Correct.
50 miles in a few years. Okay, did what the Roman Empire took centuries to do. It seemed, and this is perhaps one of the reasons some people like Bernie Sanders think socialism can work. But then, in that generation, it seemed the government could accomplish anything, and that's why we were so confident of government's capabilities that we launched a war on poverty and had all kinds of realistic goals in mind, for what government could achieve. And the secret wasn't that government was good for doing these things, but it was that great generation that was good. Because most of the people, if you look at what their backgrounds were, they were great generals, they were great businessmen, they were brilliant administrators. Most of them had backgrounds in the private sector where they had accomplished great things in the private sector, and then they went into government. But what we've got today, after that great generation, you've had successive generations of people who have done nothing with their lives but lived inside the Beltway and been the professional administrative class in Washington, running bureaucracies. None of them have built businesses or been great generals or been wonderful administrators. They've never even run a restaurant, okay? And, but they're in charge of the Center for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health. I mean, Dr. Fauci is a great example. Some guy who gets everything wrong, and he doesn't get fired ever, but just gets promotions and plaudits, the fact that he's been completely wrong and his policies have been incredibly destructive of people's constitutional rights and of the economy. And, and we've had several generations of incompetent bureaucrats like that. People who their gift in life is being able to shift blame for their screw-ups and get somebody else fired, in the process of protecting their rear ends. And that's what they're chiefly good at. And in short, we've gone from a civilization that seemed capable of doing anything to a civilization that can't even put up a website for Obamacare that works, okay? Or have a CISA, a Cyber Infrastructure and Security Agency. Sounds like an impressive name, but when you stack it with people like Christopher Krebs and Brandon Wales, it's certainly going to fail, because it's got these incompetent people who don't know how to do anything except be lobbyists and ass kissers, and that's where we are. So no matter which party is in power, President Trump's most important promise, and I think the American people chiefly voted for him because they thought he was capable of saying, "You're fired." And they expected him to do that 5,000 times at least, to get rid of that top layer of senior executive service incompetence and drain the swamp that's killing this country. It's literally killing this country with incompetence. The whole coronavirus thing is a macrocosmic example, I suppose, of the decline of competency in Washington. This was not a serious biological threat, even though the media wants everyone to believe, and even President Trump continues to describe it as the plague. This is not the plague. The plague killed 3/4 of Europe's population.
Exactly.
Influenza had a 10% mortality rate. This thing is like the flu. And we've followed very self-destructive policies in response to it because the president got bad advice from people who don't know what they're doing. It's really disgusting. We've been talking about EMP, which the country is prepared for, but at least the excuse there is that much of what we've been discussing about EMP and cyber warfare has been deeply classified, and it's only recently, within the past 15 years, when the EMP Commission published its reports, that the kind of things we've been talking about have become unclassified. But we've known about biological warfare for many decades.
Many.
Many decades and billions of dollars supposedly getting ready for serious biological warfare, like genetically engineered anthrax, genetically engineered smallpox, things that could kill 90% of your population.
Hmm.
We can't even handle the coronavirus. I mean, this is just outrageous. What a joke, you know? That's why we have a Center for Disease Control and the National Institute for Health. And there's even an assistant secretary, deputy secretary of defense who's supposed to be responsible for biological security. Haven't heard even once from him during this whole crisis. Instead, the president of the United States had to step in and make up for their incompetence. Even an intelligent high school student, would have known, well, I need to be prepared for biological warfare. Maybe I should have a stockpile of pharmaceuticals. Maybe I should stockpile ventilators and masks, right?
Yes.
Get the hospitals to talk to each other so we can have a coordinated response. That's what they were supposed to be doing. They didn't do any of it.
They didn't. None of it. Okay, because we only have a few more minutes left. One of the last questions I want to ask you is, what, after you've spoken about the different types of EMP and the nations that have them, what can Americans do to prepare for such an event? Is there things, knowing that some people take it seriously? I do. I've been taking EMP seriously for years, but for those who don't, because if you don't prepare, then you're going to be caught the last minute rushing to get something to eat, something. What do you recommend? How can Americans be prepared for such an event?
Yeah, it's another sign of decline of our civilization. Okay, that people like you, so-called preppers, are in such a minority.
Mm-hmm.
Because the great generation, my parents' generation, they'd never heard of EMP. But they would have been prepared for it because they had grown up during the Great Depression, and they had survived World War II, and they deeply mistrusted government. They had seen it fail in War and Peace already, and they knew that they were their own defense. They had to be their own frontline defense for their own lives and their own families, and they were prepared for anything. My mother, we lived on a quarter acre, and every inch of it, was a garden. My mother was constantly canning food and putting food away, stockpiling food.
Correct.
Taught us all how to hunt and fish because he fed his family through the Great Depression when he was a kid by hunting woodchucks. They called them Hoover hogs. And he was concerned that, it wasn't just for sport, but that we might have to feed ourselves someday because the system, something might happen that would cause it to collapse catastrophically. And so what's been lost is not just common sense, but they were the last of the pioneer. They were the last people who inherited those pioneer values of rugged individualism and self-sufficiency. That were really necessary not just for personal survival, but there was a character type that the founding fathers had in mind for the survival of a constitutional republic. People who want to be taken care of, people who were rugged individualists, people who were suspicious of government and anybody who wanted to take care of you, okay? Because when somebody takes care of you, you have to give up your freedom for that dependency. And no American should ever want that. So you're right, unfortunately, that a lot of people have the European kind of an attitude now. Ripe for socialism, ripe to have the collar put around their throats to become a domesticated person. Say, well, there's some guy with thick glasses at the Department of Homeland Security who's thought deeply about all this, and the government will come and rescue me whenever this happens within 72 hours. And they know this because when you go to the DHS website, it says that that you have to be prepared to be on your own for 72 hours. What a lie that is. Anybody who's been through a hurricane knows the government isn't there in 72 hours. Look at Hurricane Katrina, right? So even if you don't worry about EMP, if you're worried about hurricanes or any phenomena that could happen where critical infrastructures collapse for a protracted period of time, you should do the basics. You need to stockpile food, have a source of water, have a medicine kit and know how to use it. You have to be prepared to defend yourself. You should probably have a gun and know how to use that and keep it safe. You should think about where you live. You know, is it in a major metropolitan area where if the lights go out or there's some kind of a infrastructure collapse, it's suddenly going to be dangerous, like New Orleans was. You know, we know from hurricane experiences that within 24 hours after the lights go out, the worst elements of society come out of the dark and they start taking over. Okay, not good to put a big city under scenarios we've been talking about. Do you have a place in the country? Or do you have friends who have a place in the country? Maybe you should talk to them and talk about these scenarios and say, well, let's cooperate together, and maybe I can join you and get my family together. Have a plan. You know, have a plan. If you have a plan to hunker down if you think you are in a safe place, but if you're not in a safe place, have a plan to get out of there so you can get to some place that is safe. And always, of course, you need to be prepared to feed yourself, especially to have water. You can't live without it. And you know, with an EMP or a cyber attack that shuts down the grid, the water will not be available immediately. Okay, and that medicine kit. You know, I mentioned that.
Yes.
So these are an emergency generator would be a good thing to have. Not necessarily you know, keep your TV going, but a simple thing. For example, making sure that you can flush your toilet. You know, you need running water in order to flush the toilet. The house will become uninhabitable very quickly if that toilet doesn't work. If you don't, another good thing is the old rain barrel. You know, since pioneer days, right up until my parents' generation, almost every family had a rain barrel that would collect the rainwater that came off the roof. People are thinking about that, you know. Hey, that would be a great thing to have in the case of a lights out scenario, because you can use that rainwater for flushing your toilet or washing clothes or doing all kinds of things. So those are just some suggestions, and these things are necessary not just for survival, but you know, even if we never had to face an EMP, I wish people would do these things if only to capture the traditional values that make Americans exceptional. All right, you know, because we can't survive as a free people with dependent personalities that look to government to take care of us. You know, this willingness, this pride. My parents didn't do these things to be prepared, mainly out of fear. They did it mainly out of love, because they didn't trust anyone but themselves to be able to take care of the ones they loved. You know, they loved us kids, they loved their relatives, and they were happy people. You know, being prepared doesn't mean you live in fear. It means you live with confidence and braveness for the future.
Yeah.
You have the ability to be a good Christian and charitable to your neighbors who might need your help. Okay? Don't become one of the dependent ones that has to come begging for help, you know, and you know, in an emergency like this. Become part of the solution, not part of the problem. This country has a problem.
Wow, that is, I totally agree with you, Dr. Pry, because I think being prepared is extremely important, because we've become people dependent on the government, and that the government will take care of us when these things happen. I don't have to do all that. I don't have to buy all that water. When it happens, they'll come here. They'll give me the water I need. They'll give me the food I need. But when there's an EMP, forget it, right? You better have something at home ready to go, correct?
There's a big hurricane. You can't count on them to come to you.
Exactly.
And if you take their food and water, you also end up having to take their direction. You know, you look at how many of those poor people in New Orleans had to rely on the government. Remember what was that stadium? All the
Yes.
all the rapes, you know,
the Superdome
didn't do its job in protecting the people that they had to take stewardship over. Don't let yourself fall into the hands and become dependent for your own security on the government.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Pry, I mean, you've given a lot of info this evening, and I want to thank you for for being with us on the program. I mean, before, because I don't know if you like the proverbs. I like proverbs, and there's a proverb that it talks about being prepared. It said, "The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer." So I think it'd be a good thing to be prepared. I think from what you've stated, is there final words? Anything you would like to tell the people, audience, on Are You Ready?
Well, I do. The motto of the Boy Scouts is "Be prepared," and I definitely think that's an excellent thought to end on. But part of preparedness is also, don't go turtle, okay? And say, well, Fry has said so many bad things about the government that I'm not going to be an activist. You should be an activist on behalf of getting the country protected from EMP and cyber. This isn't the same thing as asking the government to take care of you. This is doing your job as a U.S. citizen to make Washington work for you. You should call and write your congressmen and senators, and whoever the next president of the United States is, just banging on the door of the White House and saying, I want you guys to protect the grid from EMP and cyber attacks. This is ridiculous. I want you to have competent people running the U.S. government. No more of these Christopher Krebs idiots and Brandon Wales types. We want real experts, protect protections. Keep knocking on their doors. It's a lot easier. The best solution is for the government to protect the critical infrastructures so we don't end up having to become our last ditch line of defense for ourselves. That's the best outcome.
Exactly.
That's the best outcome, to make them do their jobs. And it doesn't cost you anything. I mean, it costs a little time. That's all.
Right.
When you start preparing, just think of all the time and money you have to spend. And you should spend that time and money. All right.
Right.
It's a necessary and an intelligent thing to do. But the other thing is, if you don't surrender to the government's incompetence and obduracy and seeming to listen to you, we have got to get back control of our own government. And we're basically being lorded over by this new elite aristocracy. There's an incompetent administrative class in Washington. And we need to do everything we can to get control of our own government back. After all, we're paying them
Right.
billions of dollars in taxes. Let us start spending that money on our own defense. You look at this national defense bill that went through, millions of dollars to teach gender studies in Pakistan, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. If they took that money and spent it on the security of the American people, it would greatly increase our security in no time. And I guess that's my final word on it. Be prepared, but remember, preparedness is not just looking after yourself. It's looking after the whole country by doing your duty as a citizen to become informed and to act on these matters we've been discussing.
No, thank you. Great last word, Dr. Pryor. Thank you very much. I once again, it was an honor to have you on our program. Thank you for taking the time. You're a very busy man, and taking time to be here on Are You Ready? And hope someday in the future be able to come back and speak some more. And hopefully no EMP between now and then. We pray. You and I want to thank all those who have watched this program. And please share this. This is a lot of great information that he has given. And please, if you subscribe, thumbs up, click notification, and share. Okay, share. Dr. Pry, I hope you have a wonderful, and I didn't say at the beginning, but happy New Year to you and your family. And once again, thank you for being with us on Are You Ready?
Thank you so much for having me. And happy New Year to all of you as well, as unlikely as it may seem right now.
Right. Well, you have a very blessed evening, sir. And thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good evening. Good night.